Competitive markets also ensure that the better mousetrap gets appropriately rewarded, in turn providing incentives for innovation and lower cost production, which underpin the growth process. The logic of markets means that all this can happen in a decentralised way, with the actions of many individuals coordinated spontaneously through the prices they face, which was Adam Smith's invisible hand. Emerging shortages and surpluses, which are inherent to any system, can be signalled in a competitive market through price movements, precipitating actions by both buyers and sellers that serve to eliminate them. If a queue persists, whether it's for taxis or hospitals, you can be sure that a well-functioning market does not. As noted, not all societies have accepted the logic of markets. However, experiments around the world with alternate systems over the years have only served to demonstrate the value of markets. And indeed, we've seen a progressive shift towards or back to markets across the globe in recent decades, which has generally paid off. For example, since 1980, world GDP has risen by 2.5 times, or an unprecedented 40% per capita, with millions of people rising out of extreme poverty. China's performance since the end of the Cultural Revolution, when it partly opened the door to markets, speaks for itself. Since the beginning of the reforms in China in 1978, we've seen real GDP in that country grow by more than 10% a year. That in turn has seen a dramatic reduction in poverty, rise in life expectancy, and in other indicators of capability like literacy and health. The OECD has said that China's advance to a market economy is among the greatest economic success stories of modern times. Now, the power of markets to produce prosperity has also been reaffirmed within market economies themselves, where impediments to markets have been relaxed or where markets have been introduced in industries or activities where they had not previously existed. And Australia itself illustrates how important it is to a country's economic performance to make good use of markets, to get the right balance between freedom and intervention. And for much of the last century, that balance shifted decidedly in favour of intervention, and successive governments imposed policies that impeded competition, distorted prices, constrained business and raised its costs. For many years, the cost of those inefficiencies that multiplied under that regime were masked by the performance of our broadacre agriculture and mining. But by 1983, when the Hawke government came into power, Australia was falling off the sheep's back. Productivity and income growth were low, deficits were becoming relatively high, and Australia's per capita GDP had slipped from 5th to 15th in the OECD. The Banana Republic beckoned, in Keating's evocative phrase. The fact that we were able to reverse our economic decline, unlike the Latin American countries that shared our top billing in the global GDP ladder at the beginning of the last century, was largely due to the policy reform process set in train by that Labor government. A key strand of those reforms was directed at freeing up markets and exposing industry to competition, allowing prices to perform their proper allocative role, while undertaking reforms to make government infrastructure services more efficient and labour markets more flexible. The resulting transformation of Australia's economy from one that was inward-looking, high cost and inflexible to an innovative, adaptable and more competitive one resulted in a resurgence in productivity and income growth in this country, with Australia climbing back up to 8th in the OECD per capita GDP rankings by the end of the century. These reforms also, as Ken Henry indicated, created a new resilience that saw us withstand international disturbances that would have laid us low in earlier decades. And these include the Asian financial crisis, despite our great dependence at that time on Asian export markets. And no doubt they've contributed to our relative success thus far in containing the real impacts of the global financial crisis. One illustration being the ability, under more accommodating labour market regulation, for businesses to reduce labour inputs or hours without sacking workers. Well, if markets are so good, why do they often seem to perform so poorly, I can hear some people thinking. Why are markets resisted? Why have they got this image problem? Well, there are two features of competitive market processes that I think provide much of the explanation or reconciliation of that, and some earlier speakers have touched on them. One is what has become known since Schumpeter as creative destruction, survival of the economically fittest. Markets go by results. They pay no respect to good intentions and they punish poor economic performance. If a business can't deliver a product that people want, it will fail. That's the destruction bit. But its resources won't disappear or remain idle for long, at least in most circumstances. They'll eventually be absorbed by expanding businesses that are meeting the market test, and that's the creative bit. Creative destruction is inherent to the growth process, with limited resources, economies dependent on successful businesses and industries being able to attract people and capital from less successful ones. Stop that and you stop a major source of growth, and the banana republic beckons once more. But that also means that some firms will contract or even close down, some people will become unemployed, at least for a while, and some towns and regions will stagnate or decline while others prosper. That seems harsh to most people, especially to those directly affected. So we see considerable resistance to the logic of markets and indeed lobbying by industries for taxpayer support. This can be successful if the industry is influential enough or the regional politics appear to dictate it. Though governments generally know that it's better to provide people with transitional support in a dynamic economy than try to help them by making the economy less dynamic. And indeed, Australian governments have been liberal in providing such support, which have generally allowed a stable income distribution to be maintained during periods of quite dramatic structural reform. The second reason why markets have an image problem is that what the market values need not accord with what society values, or indeed even with the interests of the wider economy in the long run. Private and social valuations need not be the same. What's in the best interests of a firm or an industry may not be in the best interests of society or the economy. This can manifest itself in several ways, and four principal ones that occur to me are the following. Firstly, certain kinds of goods and services may not get adequately produced. These are known in the jargon as public goods, but another category is welfare. Secondly, certain people within society may not get access to services that are produced, like adequate health or adequate education, things that in the old days we used to refer to as merit goods. Thirdly, some production activities may be underdone, and these can be things like R&D, which are typically seen as market failures, but also things like safety within the workplace or probity within businesses. And fourthly, some production activities may be overdone, and I guess pollution, again, is a very topical example. These gaps all involve things that civilised societies care about. They have to do with fairness and quality of life. It could be said that they have to do with the productivity of societies, not just the productivity of economies. But we shouldn't condemn markets for failure to produce them. Markets have an important function, but they cannot satisfy every societal goal or need. They cannot do it all. That's why we have governments and why realistically we require those governments to perform a larger role than the minimalist functions advocated by libertarian philosophers.